Hi, welcome to the bathtub. It is I, the old master bather, and we're talking about Cormac McCarthy. We've been doing a few years. I guess this is almost a mission accomplished. I always think of the George Bush winning the Mideast with the mission accomplished thing behind him, and this is a mission accomplished. We've been spending the past few years reading through the entirety of Cormac McCarthy, and this last week I finished finally his last novel, STELLA MARIS, the companion, and really it's inextricable. You can't really. So I said that I just rolled off my tongue. Inextricable from the precedingly published novel, The Passenger. They're clearly written. They're written as a tandem, or as a dual novel, and they really do require one another to exist in their entirety. STELLA MARIS was his last published novel. We're going to talk about it very briefly today, I hope, and I'm going to try to do a few of these briefly today. Yeah, this was published in 2022. It seems like yesterday we started this stupid, I was going to read my way through it, and I was going to hopefully be prepared to read those novels when they came out. I got to them 3 years late. That's okay. We've got our clear, this is not mountain water, this is mountain cranberry juice. It's mountain sugar-free cranberry juice. I should add, this is a carb-free edition. We occasionally do a carb-free edition. No carbs were harmed in the making of this video. And that's it. We're going to talk very quickly. So as we talked about this a few weeks ago, The Passenger, it grows on me, and I like it more and more ever since I read it. And which is about the brother of the girl who's the central character of STELLA MARIS. And I always have to look at the back cover for the date. His name's Bobby Western, and what's her name? Alicia. I say it's Bobby and Alicia. This one takes place in 1980. There's and it takes place after his sister supposedly commits suicide. It's about his life after she commits suicide, and he gets involved. We talked about it a bit. It's a very kind of a slow, sedate, reflective novel in which he goes around to different characters and talks. They talk about all sorts of things, especially the bomb, because Bobby and Alicia's father was one of the primary architects of the nuclear bomb, and it's something that they kind of live with regretfully and with horror, with a sense of innate horror at the world we live in that can create this horrible, monstrous bomb that we still have too many of. Thanks to both parties, both of our American parties, in their love for creating and remaking nuclear weapons. So he's writing about this in a world. He's writing this fictional novel. They are fictional. They are not political. They are not trying to make us decide something, as I sort of did about just now, making a reference to our terrible political parties. It's about being in that world, and being in a world where all this destruction can happen overnight, and then linking it with the idea that we're all going to die anyway. So what does it matter how the destruction occurs? We will die, or we will be obliterated, one way or another. So in this as a companion piece, STELLA MARIS takes place in Alicia's youth when she's about 21. It's entirely a set of dialogues between her and her psychiatrist at STELLA MARIS, which is a kind of institution for mentally ill people. She's committed herself to the place. According to the Passenger, she's going to kill herself shortly after this book ends. This is something we need to talk about. But at the same time, the entire book is like The Passenger. It's a series of dialogues between her and the psychiatrist. She's supposed to be a genius, and she certainly reads like a genius. And she talks about everything from math, lots of stuff about mathematics, which, again, as in the Passenger, and in everything McCarthy writes, even when he writes about subjects I don't understand or I'm not interested in, he writes about them with such just a prose clarity that you almost think you understand what they're talking about. And so she talks about math. She talks about the horrors of the nuclear war. She talks about her family and how her mother how her family was affected by the fact that this father who sort of disappears when they're young and dies when they're young, how he's made them all, shaped them all by being part of this nuclear project. She talks about phenomenology, we talk about phenomenology, and largely all of the dialogues in the novel, especially her fantasies. We talked about this. She has fantasies about someone called the thalidomide kid and a bunch of kind of circus of almost freaks who almost seem like the children of the bomb, children of the mutations and the bombs and the horrors of these horrible bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the dreams of those. Now, as I said, well deep into the book, and almost pervading every dialogue, is the idea: how do we know what's reality? It's not the normal argument that I find too interesting myself as a reader or as a person, whether this is a reality or it's a fantasy, and how we, through phenomenology, we only know the world through the phenomena as we measure them. So how much of it is us measuring it, and how much is actually out there, etc., etc. Okay. At the end of this is the idea that there's something that pervades the universe that's not us. And that seems to be, in this book, mathematics. And one of the interesting ideas that comes out of the book is that after human beings have obliterated themselves and their planet, hopefully not next week, that all that's going to be left is math. And then the other idea is there cannot be math without people to understand math. So that's the kind of this dual idea that what's creating reality, or is reality creating us, or are we creating reality? Anyway, that's about it. I want to say one last thing. I'm going to read a couple of passages. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a good puzzler of books and understanding of books, or I don't really deal with the secret mission of books very much, or how much they're trying to get us to understand a certain idea. But there's one idea in both of these books which I think has to be at least thought about. And you guys will probably know a better job of understanding it than me. Again, in the Passenger, there's the idea that Bobby goes in. It starts with him going down to a sunken plane, and the passenger has gotten out, and then he spends the rest of his life worried about the people who might have gotten that passenger out. And the idea of someone fleeing a disaster is very important. And it also reflects on a period in Bobby Weston's youth, when he's a race car driver and he gets in an accident. And he goes into a hospital. In Stella Maris, when you're about 10, 15, 20 pages into it, and after having read this very long book, very reflective book about a man who has his own hallucinations in the course of the book, very early in this book, Alicia says to her doctor, "My brother, he was brain dead. He was in a hospital. He's had brain death. He's dead." So it suggests to us. And I don't remember the reference to brain death in this, or how long he was in the hospital, but it does suggest to us that this is what's called a posthumous fantasy novel. The fact that it's possible that he's dead, and that these are all the things that are going through his mind when he's in the hospital. That may be a little crazy, but I think that's possible. And again, I may be wrong, but I think that seems to be there. And it also led me to wonder, at the end of Stella Maris, I'm giving this away, so this is, I should say, reader's cheater somewhere along the way. But it's kind of hard to be what is it called? Cheater reader? Reader cheater? No. A spoiler. A spoiler, not a reader cheater. Wow. You masturbated your last bathtub. What we're trying to say here is that it is a spoiler alert. But you can't have a spoiler alert, because I think it's important when you're reading it. I think there's like a loop. There's like a Mobius loop running through this story. These two novels. And which of them is alive and recounting the life of the other person, and which of them is dead and being recounted. And it's possible, in my mind, you can read them, that she still lives after the end of Stella Maris. He's not in a position to tell us if she died or not. In the same way that could be dead or in brain death, and fantasizing this. I think I know it's a little probably far-fetched, but I still think that's a possibility. It also leads us to wonder all of the ideas that come into this book, which are that reality is manufactured by us to some extent. That's an idea that comes throughout all of McCarthy's books. I think he says somewhere in Blood Meridian, how can we know the world when we only have the minds we know it with to know it? That makes sense. So that idea is there. And it's also the idea that what really makes both of them feel like they're alive is their love for each other. So they're not incestuous, they're not sexually active with one another, but they love one another, this brother and sister, and they deeply love one another. And both of them finds it hard to go through life without the other. And that is life. That is your life. The best life you could possibly have. I'm going to read a couple passages, very brief ones, just to give you a flavor of the book. I really strongly, I think these are two of McCarthy's best books, my first time through. Page 72, she's talking about her mother, who was working during World War II on some projects. My mother was in high school when the war came to town. She may have thought that the world was ending. I don't know. My grandmother used to reminisce. My mother used to cry. All recent history is about death. When you look at photos taken in the late 19th century, what occurs to you is that all these people are dead. You go back a little bit further, everyone is still dead, but it doesn't matter. Those deaths are less to us. But the brown figures in the photographs are something else. Even their smiles are woeful, filled with regret, with accusation. This idea that her mother, you don't get any booktubers wiping their noses on, blowing their noses on their booktubing show. Anyway, that sense of reflectiveness of living in a life where everything is dying, including you, is omnipresent in the book. What is this? I got this passage. I just like this passage because there's a couple things that are kind of funny. They have a little discussion about life and afterlife. And they're talking about Bobby, whether he's dead or not. And at one point, the psychiatrist asks her, "Do you believe in an afterlife?" And Alicia replies, "I don't believe in this one." Which still makes me laugh. What else have we got? We got so many good passages in this. That's just of note. I forget what I picked this. Okay, she's talking about somebody. I forget, maybe Bobby, I can't. Oh no, the thalidomide kid. Alicia's there's a long passage where the doctor's asking her whether she thinks that this fantasy is alive, this fantasy that she meets and who lives with her. And he asked her what kind of things does the thalidomide kid say to her. And some of this dialogue comes out in the previous book, but here's her speaking some summaries of what this thalidomide kid sometimes says. He might say that milk is the beverage of choice among all right-thinking night folk. Or he would say that if anything were true, wouldn't everybody know it by now? Or that you shouldn't worry about what people think of you because they don't do it that often. That's actually a great line. Or that we are hardly creatures of the light, in case you hadn't noticed. Or that the darkest hour is just before the storm. It's also true. Or when you close your eyes, do I go away? Do you? So, the fantasy goes away, or do you go away when I close my eyes? The last thing I'll say, and I do think I would put these up to the top of my list. I'm going to try to do a list of my favorite McCarthy's down to my least favorite, or fairly soon, probably shortly. And I would put these pretty high. I think they're quite substantial books. These are not. I think they were. I read some of the reviews. I thought they were a little dismissive. What I read. I don't read reviews very often, so maybe I'm wrong. They're two quite extraordinary books, and they really, really stay with you. And the one last thing I would say is that one of the notepads in here says, one of the notes in the thing says, is that here's a guy. One of the things I have to say about McCarthy that I admire is some of his books, a few of his books I don't like that much, but still, he seemed to always be trying something new. And I really do think, just like the Border trilogy was very different from his previous novels, this is the closest to Suttree I can remember. Those of you who love Suttree would probably like this, because it's about a guy with a bunch of crazy loser friends, though it's a little less comic, raucous comedy than that book is. But this is a very unusual and very well considered and very devoted. He's devoted to writing good books, and he writes two very different books here. And I really enjoyed them both. And that's all I have to say. Okay, stay safe. No carbs. More soon.